Hello friends, welcome back to the Trinity Stamps YouTube channel. I am Lauren and I'm so excited to have a video today sharing the brand new Apple of My Eye die set, the coordinating apple core stencil, as well as the creepy candy apple add-on die set. I just absolutely love these products together from this new release, and we're going to create three autumn holiday or fall themed cards today. So I've got all my blending brushes. I've already die cut everything and I have them into little trays so I can keep things organized. And we're going to start with using the Apple of My Eye die set with the apple core stencil to create just a kind of generic apple, and we're going to make this a shaped card. So I'm going to start with my blending. I've lined up the largest part of the core with the stencil, and I'm using some distress ink to apply and distress with through the opening of the stencil. So for this, I'm using antique linen and I'm using my brown little blending brush, and I'm trying to go in very lightly, just trying to add in some color more towards the top and bottom through that opening in the stencil. And now I'm going to take the stencil and scooch it over to the second layer. So it's slightly smaller than the large core piece that I started. And I'm going to use the same color, this again, antique linen distress ink, and I'm just going to darken up the next section. So again, starting again on the top and the bottom, trying to keep the inner part kind of, lighter. Although when I get to the last part, I decide, you know what, we're going to make this the darkest part of the core since it's the most inner part of the core. So again, adding more ink to this third part, and I'm putting distressing through the opening of the stencil. So now I have all three layers of the core and it looks so cool. And I'm going to just end that with the stenciling for this card because I die cut the seeds, so I want to use those instead. And then I also use some of the excess ink on my blending brush to just kind of darken the edges of my apple. So there's kind of a consistent shade to the inside of my apple. Now I'm going to go ahead and glue it onto the larger apple die cut. And this I die cut out of red cardstock. And I decided to go with the classic red because this is going to be a kind of teacher September, very beginning of fall, back to school themed card. So I went with the classic red apple. And then for the leaves, I die cut the larger leaf out of a lighter green cardstock and the detail part of the leaf out of a darker green cardstock. And I'm going to use, again, more Distress Oxide in my blending brush with Mowed Lawn, or not Distress Oxide, excuse me, Distress Ink. And I'm blending on some dimension and shadow with this ink onto those two green pieces. And then I will glue them together. When I have small pieces like this, I like to use some tweezers and a fine tip glue. But when I layered them together, I realized I covered a lot of the ink. So I'm going to bring back my little blending brush and add in a little bit more color to darken the leaf and just give it more dimension. However, just the two pieces by themselves, because it's a layering die set, look really great together. You don't need to add these extra touches. Finally, I have my seeds and I'm going to add those to the inside of my apple. I grabbed my little jewel picker tool here and the pokey tool, and I'm going to use the wax side to pick up those seeds and place them where I want them onto my apple core. And then I also used it to help with placing it onto the apple. And then I use the poker side to pick up excess glue that sometimes comes out when you press the cardstock down, and that will finish off the apple. I also die cut the adorable worm. This worm is just the cutest thing ever. And what I love about this die is there's an embossing to it as well. So when you die cut it out, it also leaves impressions of the different segments of this cute little worm. And I'm using saltwater taffy to add a little bit of shadow. Again, distress ink with my blending brush. So now that the worm has its color, let's glue the details on. There's these adorable glasses as well as some die cuts for the eyes and a cute little mouth. So again, using the wax tip to pick up the small dots for my eyes, and I glued those down first, and using the poker side to kind of maneuver around where I want my eye to sit perfectly on the worm. And then I'm going to add adhesive to the glasses, but I'm only going to add it to the center part of the glasses because it does stick out past the, the sides of my little worm's head, so I don't need to worry about adding glue to the edge of the glasses. And then finally, I'm going to add the mouth. I'm going to put the glue down onto the worm and then use the wax tip to pick up the mouth and place that onto the worm. And then again, I flip my tool over to the pokey side to pick up any excess glue, or also just to gently move my die cut piece where I need it to go. So all of my pieces are ready, they're all assembled. So let's do the die cutting to make our shaped card. So I wasn't really sure how I was going to do this, but I decided to cut 2 pieces of the apple and then I will glue them together to make the shaped card. I thought about trying to figure out how to score it correctly, but I thought I was making it more complicated on myself, so we're going to do it the easiest way I could think of. So I cut my sturdy white cardstock in half, and I'm going to cut my apple first, the full shape of this apple. This is like the shadow die for this die set. And I will set that aside, and then I'm going to do a partial die cut now. So that way I can create a seam for my card. So I have it on the white cardstock, my die, and then as you can see, I didn't put my clear plate all the way to the end. I kept it to a, almost to the top, but it left only a, it didn't die cut the top of my apple, if that makes sense, as you can see here visually. So now I'm just trimming out the back piece of my card. You can see here I have enough room to score and make a little flap to glue behind my apple die cut. So my trimming tool also has a scoring tool, so I just scored that line. And there you can see, now I have the back side of my card. So I need to glue these together. I wanted it to look a little straighter, so I'm just trimming off some of that excess paper. And I'm going to grab my tear tape and I'm going to add some adhesive to that flap on my apple, the back of this card. So just lining it up on that tab, it looks like I did a pretty good job at cutting it to about 1/4 of an inch. And then I also used just a little bit of wet glue to give me some wiggle room to get this card glued together. So I'm lining up the bottom edge of the apple and pressing those together. I'm going to use my scoring tool here just to make sure there's a really good connection between these 2 pieces. And that's how I created my own little apple shaped card. So now that the card base is done, I'm going to start adding in the details of this apple card. So we have our leaf, we have our stem, and then the actual apple with the core showing. So I'm gluing down the stem first. I like that the stem is long, so you could also have glued the end of the stem in between the red die cut piece and my core, the cream colored cardstock. So it looks like the top of the apple is a little more inside and past the red. But I just went ahead and glued this to the back of the, it'll be in the back of my apple. So I have my stem and my leaf. I'm adding now the apple, and I really actually didn't mention this earlier. I love that the core isn't like a perfect shape compared to the red apple die cut. I like that there's some, thicker spots and some thinner spots. I just think it gives the apple a lot of character. I wanted to create a sentiment for this card, so I'm bringing out the brand new Simply Sentimental teacher stamp set, and I like this thin kind of scripty teacher sentiment. So I actually die cut the sentiment first because I have a hard time lining up small die cuts like that. So I die cut it first, and I'm using the negative space within the corner of my MISTI, and then I'm lining up my stamp, and then I'll place the actual die cut into that open die cut area, add the ink to my stamp, and then stamp it down, and it will line up just perfectly onto that die cut. So it's just a little easier than trying to line up a small die cut onto a stamped image. So I'm going to use, again, my tweezers and my glue with a fine point tip, since this is a very thin die cut piece, and I'm going to glue that to the top area of my card. So using my grid mat here to help me with getting it centered and as straight as possible. I wanted to add a little bit of dimension, so I'm going to grab my foam strips and I'm going to pop up this cute little worm to, be able to curve my foam strip. I took off both sides of the release paper, and that just allows me to be able to bend and play with that foam strip and makes it easier to attach it behind in a die cut that is not a straight line. So I attached that to the bottom of the card, and I think it just turned out so cute. Let's reinforce that scoring just a little bit more with the scoring tool. And you can see here a final look at this adorable shaped apple card. I think this is going to be so fun for a teacher thank you, teacher appreciation, just in general, a very cute card for your teacher or local teacher. So after the fall and back to school, we're moving into Halloween time, and this is again the apple of my eye die set, and I also die cut some of the add-ons from the Creepy Candy Apple add-on die set to create this poison apple look. It is so cool. This is probably going to be my favorite way to use this die set. I die cut the apple out of the same red cardstock, and then I use some green for the leaves. Again, same thing as the first card. And I use the lighter green as well as some green glitter cardstock to create the poison look of it dripping down on my apple. Now there are two dies that create kind of eyes, so it looks like a skeleton face for this green poison on the apple. And you can use this die cut to cut more red cardstock so it looks like you have eyes on the poison, but I wanted to cut it out of the green so the red of the apple is coming through the poison, which is what I would imagine a poison apple would look like. So I'm using some repositionable tape, and I die cut the eye openings out of the light green cardstock, which will be layered on top of the metallic glitter paper. And I place them back together, place the dies in the same spot, and I'm going to create a hinge with my repositionable tape. So you can see here, I actually have it connecting together at the top, and I am going to gently lift up my dies off of the green that I've already die cut. I'm going to slide that piece out, and then I'm going to lay them right back down onto the metallic green cardstock. So that hinge should keep my dies in place while I cut it out of the second layer. Now, if it doesn't line up perfectly, that's okay. It's poison and it's dripping down, but I'm pretty proud of myself. I did a great job lining those up. And the die actually has a nose as well, but that's just going to cut out of the metallic, the second layer, so I could do that pretty easily. Again, just using some repositionable tape to keep it in place while I run it through my die cut machine. And the same eye and nose dies not only cut out the eyes and nose, but there are actually two pieces. So you can see I'm pulling out these darker, kind of more cranberry red pieces of cardstock, and those are inlaid into the openings, and it just makes it have more of like a shadow look, like it's dripping over a thick goop over the apple. And so I die cut those out of a darker red cardstock. I put the leaf together just like I did for the first card, and I'm using more of that Mowed Lawn Distress ink to add some dimension to the poison that will be dripping down. And I'm going to glue these two poison layers together, again using my tweezers and some glue so I don't get my fingers completely dirty and gluey like I normally do. So I'm going to layer that light green piece on top of the shiny metallic glitter paper. With those in place, I originally tried to glue these pieces again that cut out from the eyes and the nose to create more of the shadow look. I wanted them to look even more shadowy, so I was trying to glue them a little offset behind the opening that they die cut, but because it's intended to fit perfectly inside of that opening, I was having trouble with this, so I'm just going to skip over this attempt, and we're just going to show how you glue this piece to the inside of the opening for the nose. So pretend I haven't glued those in yet, and now when their poison is actually glued to the apple, then you can inlay those dark red pieces. I also got a little bit of glue everywhere, so I'm just using the pokey side of my tool here to try to pick up some of that excess glue where it's kind of seeping out the edges. And then this is how you actually add in those small die cuts. So I'm adding a little bit of glue onto the red apple, and I'm layering inside that darker red piece. And you can see it creates a really cool kind of shadow look, like your poison that's dripping down has, some thickness to it. And that will finish off, assembling the apple part of our poison apple. So let's get our stem put on. I'm not following the die outline like I did for the first card that I used to create my actual card base with. So I'm just gluing the stem to where I like it, and I'm going to glue the leaf the same way. I'm not really following the original design of the apple, which is nice because you can either use that shadow die cut to have a nice stable area for your apple, or you can completely design it up on your own. So adding a little bit of glue to that leaf and adding it to the back side of my stem. Now the stem is a little dainty, but I'm not going to worry about it because I'm going to glue it to a card. Now this is a piece of spiderweb cardstock I've had in my stash literally probably forever. So use what you have. There are lots of really awesome spiderweb pattern papers out there, or you could use an embossing folder or a background stamp. So use what you have if you want to achieve this same look. But I'm using my tonic decal trimmer to trim this piece of background paper down to 4 by 5 1/4. So just using the guide on my trimmer and adding that fun decal look to my background. And you can see here that my apple will fit perfectly on this background. I wanted to add a cute little spider because I think the Caught My Heart coordinating die, well, the Caught My Heart stamp is adorable, but I love that I can cut out a little spider on its own from the coordinating die set. So I cut it out of some black cardstock, and I know where I'm going to put it because I have a little bit of glue in an area that I don't like. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to embellish my card. And its eyes also cut out. So I'm just going to cut a little piece of white cardstock, just a little circle to tuck behind my spider. There is a shadow die, so you can easily cut the shadow die out of some, colored cardstock to layer behind. But I just wanted my eyes to have a contrast to that black, so I did white. And I'm going to add some foam adhesive behind my apple as well as my spider. So again, like I said, the stem, is a little more on the flimsy side because it's this thin piece of paper. So I'm adding some foam adhesive to my leaf as well as behind my apple. So when I glue it down, there's good stability on both of those pieces and my stem will be just fine. So I'm gluing this to my background piece of pattern paper, and I'm gluing my spider to cover the one area of glue that I wasn't really happy with. So there you go. Never a mistake, always an opportunity to embellish, right? And I stamped my sentiment from the Witch's Brew stamp set and used the coordinating die, and it has such a cute little fun Halloween sentiment on it. And I'm adding some foam adhesive to the edges of my sentiment and some wet glue in between that. So my spooky apple has a witching you a happy Halloween to coordinate with, my little poison apple. I have my A2 card base, but I didn't like the background on the white cardstock, so I cut a piece of black cardstock to be a panel onto my card base, and then I will glue down my card front with the black. And I just think that, definitely makes it more spooky and Halloween themed. And that will finish off the Halloween card. I love the shine of the glitter paper. I love how cute this looks and how easy it is to make such a fun looking poison apple card. Now jumping into the final card, we're going to move on to more fall, maybe a more Thanksgiving theme. And when I think of fall food, caramel apples, I guess it's kind of Halloweenish too, but caramel apples definitely come to mind. So I die cut my apple out of some green cardstock this time. And this is the same green that I've been using for the rest of my cards with the leaves. And I'm using my stencil again. This is the 6x6 apple core coordinating stencil, and there are these kind of like shimmery, like the shine of a shiny apple as part of the stencil. So I'm using that Modelon Distress ink again with my blending brush and adding that color through the stencil to create, some fun look. So my apple looks more than just a one-dimensional piece of green cardstock. I also die cut this kind of extra shiny piece that was intended to be part of the creepy candy, but I didn't glue it on. I thought, what if I could use it on this apple instead? So while this isn't the original intent of this piece, I'm going to add it so it looks like it's also part of the shine of the apple. So I'm just gluing it to line up with that detail that I stencil on the right side of my apple. And it doesn't layer quite perfectly how I was picturing in my head, but we're going to go with it and it will be fine when my sentiment is added at the end of the card. So again, I'm creating a caramel apple look. So I die cut my caramel out of some brown cardstock, and I die cut my little popsicle stick out of some craft cardstock, but I wanted to tuck it inside of my apple. So I'm just using a trimmer here for paper and a little blade, and I I trimmed a slot on this green cardstock just large enough to tuck that piece in. Again, you could tuck it behind it, no big deal, but I just want it to look like it was inside of the center of the apple. So now that I have that ready to go, we're going to ink up because I like adding some ink to create more dimension on my cards. So for the popsicle stick and the piece of caramel, I'm bringing back in my brown blending brush, but this time I'm going to be using Vintage Photo as my ink. And I'm gluing my little popsicle stick to the slot of my apple. So I added my glue and I slid it through the opening that I used the blade to trim. And before I glue on my caramel, I want it to look more like caramel. So again, using Vintage Photo with my blending brush to completely do the edges of this piece of cardstock. I will end up adding some glitter dust spray from Thermoweb on this. So I wish I would have gone a little bit darker with my inking here, but it's fine. It looks really cute at the end anyway. But the glitter spray does kind of tone out some of this brown. So if you're doing this card on your own, I would go a little heavier handed than I did with the ink here, or maybe use a darker color. But in the end, I still think it looks like a really fun caramel apple. So once I'm done adding ink to these caramel pieces, like I said, I'm going to grab my gold glitter dust spray from Thermoweb, and it's going to add a really fun shine to these caramel pieces. I just think it steps up and it makes it look more like shiny caramel than just using the dye on its own. But if this is something you don't have, I think it looks perfectly wonderful as is. But definitely step it up if you have some fun shimmery shiny stuff in your stash. So I have my card base ready. This is an A2 cardigan, and that sound like I said cardigan, card again. And I'm bringing out this fun yellow plaid cardstock from a paper pad, but I wanted to add a little bit of ink to it. So grabbing that Vintage Photo again, I'm gonna blend some of that ink along all four edges of this background paper just to give it a little more texture. And I'm also going to do some ink smushing onto my glass mat, spray some water, and then use a paintbrush to flick on some Vintage Photo splatter. It's very subtle, but I like the way it just adds a little bit more to this pattern paper. So once that is dry, I'll go ahead and add that to my card base. And by now, the glitter dust spray should be dry on my caramel piece so I can add it to my apple. So I went ahead and added that to my card base. I didn't trim it down, so my plaid cardstock is just the A2 size. And then using my liquid adhesive to glue my caramel to my apple to create the caramel apple. So as you can see there, it's kind of lost some of the ink texture, like I said, so I wish I would have gone a little bit heavier handed or used a darker color, but it still looks like caramel to me. I'm adding some foam adhesive behind my apple. I'm just going to completely cover the back side, peel off the release paper, and I'm going to glue that to the center of my card. It fit just perfectly on that A2 background. There's also this cute little extra kind of drip of caramel, so I used a small piece of foam adhesive to make sure I include that as well. I just love that little extra touch of the extra little dye there. So my caramel apple is done, but I want to add a sentiment. So I brought in the also new Simply Sentimental stamp set, but this one is Thankful. And I embossed Thankful on a piece of kind of a dark rust orangey brown color with some white embossing powder. And I'm adding this with foam adhesive to my apple. So it's going to go right there on the green cardstock. So I'm going to again completely cover the back with some foam adhesive so there's lots of stability. Peel off all the little release papers and glue that down to my card base. And you can see it kind of also hides that weird little curve of my green glitter paper that I wasn't terribly happy with. So that's just, again, never make a mistake, just an opportunity to embellish. I'm bringing in some adorable confetti. This is for Sprout, and they're flat-backed translucent confetti, and just using my wax tip on my tool and some liquid adhesive to glue those down. Now the caramel, I felt like it needed some more shine or highlight, so I'm just using a white gel pen, and I'm going to add some highlights around the caramel, and I'm also going to make it look more like it's dripped and sitting on the bottom. And here you can see that wonderful shine. I think it really does look like caramel. So fun. So here is a look at all three cards. So we have our Thanksgiving caramel apple, our Halloween poison apple, and our teacher with our studious little worm shaped card. One more look at the Thankful card, and then I'll give you a final look at all three. But I hope you enjoyed this inspiration using these brand new products from the release this week. I hope it inspires you to also create and have some fun today. You can find links to all of the Trinity Stamps products that I used for these cards today down below in the description, and make sure you check out some other videos today. Thanks for watching. Bye!